and have more questions. A couple of administrative things. All participants will be in listen-only mode, and we will take questions at the end of the presentations. If you look on the right side of your screen, you can see where you can write them in, and please, when you do so, indicate what organization you're from and who you would like to answer your questions. Next. As an initial matter, I really want to thank my partners in this venture. We have been fortunate to partner with entities, all of whom know how important getting gigabit or ultra high-speed networks are to your communities. If you look at the partners, you see we cover a wide range of interests, but we all have one common goal, which is to make sure that we become more competitive and are more in a global economy, and we believe we can do that through having better infrastructure deployment. Next. So what do we do? What do we know? We know that gigabit connectivity is proving vital to economic growth. We know that you have to have ultra high-speed gigabit connectivity to become relevant in a global economy, that it is an essential prerequisite to economic growth and job creation. We've seen two recent studies within the last 3 months that validate this statement. The first from the Information Technology Innovation Foundation, their 2012 State New Economy Index, which described the need for faster transmission of larger amounts of data and the need for rapid build-out of all fiber networks. Second, TechNet's 2012 State Broadband Index, which highlighted how high levels of investment in broadband infrastructure vastly increase your chances for economic benefit and growth. Next. So everyone on this call is saying, duh, we do know this. It's intuitive. But the big question is, how do we get there? How do we actually solicit, invest in, and utilize gigabit connectivity and make it work for economic progress? How do we attract private and public investment? How do we access demand? These are the difficult issues that have inhibited many communities from investing in these kind of networks. Next. So to find out where some of the knowledge holes were that were preventing communities from this kind of investment, we conducted the survey we mentioned earlier of individuals from all facets of the gigabit broadband ecosystem, including community and civic leaders, service providers, and others. A survey that many of you participated in. And today we will review some of the results of that survey and tell you about the key findings. Next. So here's what we found. 74% of you said the majority of your residents and businesses are not satisfied with their current internet service. And the reason for that, the main complaint, was slow speed. Next. 43% says that civic, political, and business leaders consider broadband to be a vital infrastructure, just like power lines and highways. Next. 92% of you said that economic development and community growth are behind your interest in gigabit connectivity. It's not just triple play. It's real economic drivers that are leading to wanting this ultra high-speed networks. Next. And 73% of you said that there were very clear obstacles such as financing and permitting that appear to stand in the way of deployment. Next. So when reviewing the survey results in total and looking at all the comments we got back, we learned that people need more information in 4 key areas. First, they want to hear about the real stories and benefits of fiber deployment, not just What's today's soundbite? They want to hear from service communities that have deployed and understand how it changes lives. Second, you all want to understand the money. How do I get it? What is the business model approaches? Where is their financing? What are these public-private partnerships? Where do they work? Third, people need to understand technical administrative issues. You do not need to be a telephone company yourself, but how do you get the expertise that allows you to judge and manage a broadband network? And finally, how do you handle the stakeholders? When you undertake a project like this, you're going to have a confluence of community activists, elected officials, civic leaders, and businesses. How do you manage that? Next. So today, fortunately, we have our partners with us who are all leading experts in broadband communities. And they will discuss these issues and how they've worked to solve these pressing problems and help communities just like yours upgrade their network. First, we will hear from Jeff Ryman, the President of Broadband Communities, and Mike Romano, Senior Vice President of Policy at National Telecommunications Cooperative Association. They will discuss the real stories and benefits of fiber deployment. Jeff will discuss some of the issues they've seen at broadband communities and the findings about success stories they have seen firsthand, while Mike will highlight how ultra-high bandwidth communities are impacting the economic development and viability of rural communities. Next, we'll hear from GigU Executive Director Blair Levin, who will discuss the financial aspects of a network upgrade. And following Blair, we'll hear about the technical and administrative side of deploying a fiber network from those who have had recent experience with the Google Fiber project. Thank you to Aaron Deacon, Managing Director of KC Digital Drive, Pam Curtis, Assistant to Mayor Joe Reardon of Kansas City, Kansas, and Rick Usher, Assistant City Manager of Kansas City, Missouri, for joining us today. And finally, we'll hear from Steve Traylor, the President of NATOA, who will discuss that careful juggling act when you're trying to get so many disparate stakeholders to move in the right direction. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff.
Great, thanks, Heather. Next slide, please. Again, good afternoon. I'm Jeff Ryman. I'm with Broadband Communities. I recently joined the magazine and trade show company. We are the industry's publication, both a print, online, digital footprint focused on promoting and enabling fiber deployments nationwide. Just by way of background, prior to my recent joining of Broadband Communities, I worked with the Las Vegas-based telecommunications consulting firm, the Broadband Group, worked to incorporate fiber-based broadband networks, application, and services into an overall community infrastructure plan. And prior to my work at the Broadband Group, I was with Credit Suisse in the Boston branch of the investment bank. To begin the webinar, I was asked to focus on some of the tangible examples that we've seen of what pure fiber network infrastructure can do for a community. In other words, to focus and address the real benefits of fiber to the home. Next slide. In doing so, I think it's important to first focus on a common challenge, and that being, while many of us may already understand or are beginning to understand the benefits of advanced communication infrastructure, we can't necessarily expect our constituents or our target customers to share that same enthusiasm or appreciation. I use the example here in Nevada. I worked with the Nevada Hospital Association on implementing a statewide fiber network connecting acute care hospitals around the state. This network, once active, will have the capacity to deliver a dedicated gig to each facility. But it's funny, when I would visit some of these rural hospitals in the middle of the desert here in Nevada, many who relied on a bonded T1 for their entire communication platform at the hospital, as I would be introducing and describing the project, the executives at this hospital, they'd look at me and say, you know, Jeff, this is great, but we already have the internet. Why do we need this fiber project? For those who aren't clear on all the telecom definitions, what a bonded T1 is, I think the best way to describe it, it's basically one step above using two cans and a string. So I use that example because there's an important education component involved when implementing a fiber network. In many cases, individuals, even the enterprise companies in your region may not be aware of what they don't have. And what compounds that difficulty is that legacy providers operating legacy networks are going to argue that everything's fine. Coax or copper infrastructure that is in place, no matter how old, meets the connectivity needs of the community and the businesses and residents that reside there. But the truth is legacy broadband networks have limited and often constrained capacity, and the legacy providers know that. But it brings me to the second point of this slide, and that is the imperativeness of a community to conduct an active campaign that defines and demands advanced broadband facilities. Otherwise, your local provider is going to milk the legacy network infrastructure for as long as they can. And it's not because they don't know that they need to update their infrastructure and that they'll do so eventually, but in many cases because they are comfortable with what they know and what they have and have always done. So the market must really pull, and you really must encourage those local providers to make the shift into fiber to the home, or potentially encourage a competitor to enter into the market who's willing to do so. But for the market to effectively pull, it's important that clear message is created, and I go back to my dialogue with the management at the rural hospitals. Implementing a pure fiber network is not about simply improving triple play consumer entertainment. This isn't about looking at YouTube videos at higher quality. This is transformative. It's changing the way we work, the way we learn, the way we communicate, the way we practice healthcare, the way we're educated, and the way that we enhance the economic well-being of our households, our communities, and the regions in which we live in. Next slide, please. Brief background for those who may not be familiar with all the specifics of the telecommunication access solutions, just comparing fiber to the home to other legacy access solutions such as HFC and DSL. Those are the common platform for legacy cable providers and phone companies, respectively. While most will use some fiber in their network, they're inherently limited at the active nodes within the field where a fiber is connected and then splits and connected to the home or business using coax or copper. That bandwidth is then shared amongst any number of customers. So obviously the available bandwidth is clearly far less than an all fiber network where an individual fiber connects directly to that end user. Another key limitation of both HFC and DSL is that these halfway approaches, if you will, they don't allow for symmetrical bandwidth. Users can't upload information as fast as they can download it. And from a cost perspective, actually, from a service provider's perspective on the OpEx, these nodes are actually active electronics, so it fundamentally increases their OpEx exposure required to operate those networks. Would you go to the next slide, please? Deep fiber is another term that you'll often hear. This really is essentially the same solution as I just outlined, but what happens is the active nodes will serve less customers. They're essentially pushed deeper to the home, but the bandwidth is still shared, albeit by a small number of users, but those same limitations apply. Finally, wireless, especially 4G and LTE. Here's a common pushback or a question in everyone's mind. You'll hear that 4G wireless can support up to 54 megabits. That's pretty impressive. But first, let's focus on the magical words that service providers love to use, and that's up to, which means they promise to provide up to 54 megabits. And if they're providing 5 megabits or less, by definition, they're still meeting their stated commitment. So when you hear 54 megabits, that's the potential bandwidth that's shared by all users connected to a single cellular antenna site. So you can understand that the more users in that area is going to limit the amount of bandwidth available to each individual. Now, to be clear, wireless services are important public amenities, and no one's arguing to the contrary. But they're not substitutes or replacements for fiber to the home. They complement and extend the fixed fiber networks. Looking at the graphic here, I'm sure it's intuitive, but you see the different graphics symbolize the different bandwidth capacity of certain access solutions. It demonstrates why fiber to the home, supporting up a gig of connectivity, is really the only solution that can meet the growing demand for broadband services. The outside circle is what is representative of a gig, that gray line. Next slide. Looking at the tangible benefits, in addition to the clear evidence that Heather outlined earlier in terms of economic development, Fiber connectivity encourages business to stay, it allows businesses to grow, and it attracts new businesses. But I want to focus first really on a fiber network's impact on education and healthcare. And starting with education, you really can't open up a periodical these days without somewhere reading about massive open online classes, or MOOCs. In fact, I read a recent article in the Harvard Business Review, the quote that I thought was fascinating. The advent of massive open online classes is the single most important technological development of the millennium so far. And if you're not familiar with MOOCs, it's the movement where institutions of higher education, probably most notably MIT, although it's quickly catching on, are now making all of their lectures available to anyone with an internet connection. And obviously that internet connection has to be able to support the high quality video. Without going into deep detail on the potential impact of this movement, I think it's needless to say it's a game changer in terms of how knowledge can now be attained. When you look at more of the grade school level, high school students, no longer are children going to be limited by the curriculum that's offered at their local brick and mortar school. You think of a high school sophomore in a rural community who wants to take Japanese. Now through distance education platforms, that can be possible when supported by fiber networks. And this isn't science fiction, this is happening. I look at here in Las Vegas, the Clark County School District, which is the largest school district in the state. They're now operating in partnership with Vegas PBS, a full virtual high school where all classes are conducted over high quality video applications. It's pretty neat. And this third bullet point here, the digital divide, and once again, without taking a deep dive here, but you may have heard that term, the digital divide. Well, here I think is the clearest example, and staring us right in the face. There's going to be a fundamental difference in terms of access to education and opportunity for children who live in an area with advanced broadband networks versus those who don't. Next slide, please. From the healthcare perspective, I did my best to limit this as much as I could because I feel like I could go on for quite a while. But I truly believe, and I think it's very evident, that we're at the tipping point for the adoption and use of telemedicine services and implementation of regional and nationwide health information exchanges. The transformation of healthcare and IT, it's moving ahead fast. And it's not new. It's been occurring, but finally, with the implementation of the advanced broadband networks that we're beginning to see, it's enabling these telemedicine applications to really be adopted. And when you look back, it was in 2004, in an executive order of the President Bush, where he called for the development and nationwide implementation of a fully interoperable health information exchange. Well, that's now law. If you work with any of your local healthcare providers, you are probably aware about the HITECH Act that requires healthcare facilities to demonstrate meaningful use of electronic medical records to be shared among providers. If you're not aware of this, it's important that you are, because the hospital and medical facilities in your area need to have sufficient connectivity to support this, or else they begin getting penalized under Medicaid and Medicare reimbursements. Next slide. In terms of the telemedicine and telehealth applications, including remote diagnostics, psychiatric support, real-time monitoring of patients, no matter their geographic location, this just lists the benefits for the patients, healthcare professionals, and medical facilities, and that list is long. But the key takeaway here is how telemedicine impacts access to and the delivery of healthcare, making it more efficient and more affordable. Next slide. And next slide. So how do you leverage the benefits of the fiber broadband network? Look, we know fiber to the home adds value to properties. Fiber connections make single-family homes easier to sell, and it makes MDUs easier to rent. And I hope our friends in Kansas City can hopefully continue to support that claim. Communities benefit from fiber to the home. They become more attractive as locations for people to live and to do business. They have an advantage in attracting everything from advanced manufacturing to data centers to small business startups. And it's for that reason why globally you're seeing fiber to the home as the leading technology for next generation communication. Next slide. Outside of the technical aspect and the financial aspects, which I know will be addressed on this call, I just want to emphasize the importance of implementing a successful fiber to the home network involves more than simply stringing fiber. As we all know, I don't mean to trivialize it like that, but it's complex. But when done properly, the return is significant, and not just the return on investment, which it can be, but also the return on community. And at Broadband Communities, our magazine, we work to keep our fingers on the pulse of the industry. We're tracking the newest innovations, analyzing what's working, what's not, and really trying to help our readers understand why. So it's our mission to really demystify the business for both the network deployers as well as the users. And as I wrap up here, I'll just note that subscription to the magazine is free, and when you subscribe, I do hope that you find the value in its content. Slide 22. I'll add that we have a Fiber to the Home primer. We actually launched this in partnership with the Fiber to the Home Council. It's an excellent tool when working to learn about the technology. It's really easy read and easy to use fashion. We find it's especially useful as a handout to those who may be totally foreign to Fiber to the Home and its benefits within your community. So once again, those are available, and we'd be happy to distribute if you contact us at Broadband Communities. That is my presentation. In closing, I just would like to add, and I say this with my highest conviction, if you have not already done so, I encourage you to download and read the recently released book, The Politics of Abundance. It's authored by Blair Levin, who is on this panel as in partnership with former FCC Chairman Reed Hunt. I'll tell you, if you're interested in this industry, it's a must-read. And if you're anything like me, you're going to read it, then you're going to read it again, and you're going to continue to reference it as a key source of valuable information. So Politics of Abundance, once again, I couldn't have a higher endorsement for it. And I will, with that, conclude. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Oh, sorry, Heather, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Mike.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Heather, and thanks to the Fiber to the Home Council for letting me participate in this. My name is Mike Romano. I'm the Senior Vice President of Policy for the National Telecommunications Cooperative Association, NTCA. I'm excited to be able to participate in this. We're always excited to be able to preach to the choir or to converts about the benefits of fiber to the home deployment and what it really means for the community. Because to give a little bit of background, I'll get into this in a few slides here. Our providers, our members of the association are community-based operators. They are folks based in the towns they serve, the farm areas they serve, the rural areas they serve, and so have a real accountability and a real mission to deliver service to those folks, and are always looking to upgrade their networks. And it's exciting to be able to talk about some of the things that they're doing in some of the most challenging parts of the country. Next slide, please. So just a brief background on who NTCA is and who its members are, more importantly. I use the acronym LEX in here. I'm sure most folks on this listening in know what that is, but it's a local exchange carrier. We're talking about the small rural telcos, the family-owned companies, cooperatives who operate exclusively in rural areas and serve individual communities and surrounding countryside, if you will. They've really been leaders in broadband deployment, even predating a lot of the sort of fiber to the home and deeper fiber pushes into networks. NTCA is made up of about 600 small businesses that operate in these rural and remote areas. There are about 1,000 of these companies, though, throughout the country, and they serve about 5% of the U.S. population, but about 40% of the U.S. landmass. So you get an idea of the densities there. The average density of the NTCA member serving area is about less than 10 households per square mile, and about 25% of these companies serve areas that have fewer than 2 households per square mile. So you're talking about the challenges of not only terrain to operate in, whether it's rocky terrain or Alaska or wetlands or forest land or what have you, but also obviously the challenges of lack of density. Most of these folks, an interesting thing too, is they're about over 100 miles on average from their primary internet connection. So they've got the challenges of not only trying to deploy world-class networks in the local area, but then also making sure that the capability that's delivered to the consumer on an end-to-end basis is top-notch. And so getting access to sufficient middle-mile capacity is a very important piece as well. At the end of the day, these companies serve areas that are essentially left over by Ma Bell. It would be nice to have the choice of where to deploy and when to deploy and on what terms to deploy, but these folks are people who serve the areas that were not served through the Bell system. And so in the earlier part of the 20th century and the middle part of the 20th century, popped up to serve the unserved and underserved areas at that time. Just to give one little piece of context for the kinds of areas these folks serve, I actually, a little anecdote, I was in at the FCC with a general manager of one of these companies a few months ago, and this general manager was talking to an FCC staffer about the area that his company served, and the FCC staffer said, oh, that's near the town of X. And the manager responded that, oh, the town of X, it's a town of about 10,000 people. We're outside of that area. I would love to serve an area with 10,000 residents as an addressable market. So it gives you a sense of the challenges these folks face. There isn't much competition in these areas. About 2/3 of these companies see some form of competition, but it comes mostly in those towns of 2,000, 3,000 people, and many times only in the form of wireless competition, which, as I think Jeff noted before, is often more of a complementary service than a substitute, to be sure, in terms of the speeds that it can obtain over time. Just one final note on what these folks in the historical context, they've been cited as doing a commendable job in deploying broadband in these areas, have taken a real leadership role. Jeff just mentioned the market pull and the importance of the market pull. I couldn't agree more with that. In many respects, these folks are prime examples of what the market pull can do. They're accountable to the communities they serve because they live and operate in these communities. So they hear it and see it every day. They're serving their neighbors, their family, their peers. So the accountability that goes along with being a community-based provider results in these folks trying to get as quickly as they can to as high capacity, high quality network as they can put out into the market. So that leads into the next bullet about the evolving technology mix. These folks are really doing it however they can. You see there the different percentages statistics on how they're deploying. We're happy to see the fiber to the home numbers as high as they are in terms of the percentage of members who have been able to use some fiber to the home deployment in their networks. A great interest in getting more into there. The pace and reach of fiber really is driven largely by several factors I'd cite. First is the size of their capital budgets, what they can do year over year in these challenging areas, and based upon the return on investment, what they can do with the ability to attract consumers through affordable services, and then ultimately repay the capital that they repay the loans that they take out in order to deploy these networks. So you've got the size of the budgets, the access to the capital, and then the ROI that they can do while keeping rates affordable. So they're really trying to responsibly edge out their networks over time, replacing DSL with copper. RUS is a big driver of this rural utility service through the Department of Agriculture. RUS, through its state modernization programs, requires forward-looking, future-proofed networks, which largely dictates the deployment of fiber in these networks. So that can really help to push fiber deeper into the networks over time. But clearly, as you see there with the numbers, we've got more to do and a ways to go still. Next slide, please. Talking about the increases in speeds, here you'll see some percentages about the ways and the speeds at which different rural telcos can deliver, what speeds they can deliver to their customers. Obviously, note that these are downstream download speeds. Upload speeds vary based upon the technology that's available. The fiber to the home obviously can hit the highest speeds, and is something that folks are looking to deploy all the time to improve upon. The symmetrical uploads, but the point is here that we're seeing an increase in speed over time as folks try to keep up as best they can in the face of some of the challenges in operating in these areas and some of the regulatory changes as well. All these numbers, by the way, come from an NTCA broadband survey that's been done every year since 2000 and goes through 2012. That's available on our website, and it actually shows an interesting evolution as people have pushed to deploy fiber to the home deeper into the networks and get to fiber to the home network deployments. The numbers on the second bullet in this slide, second main bullet, we asked people about what additional amount of investment would be needed to bring all their customers just to 25 megabits symmetrical. And the numbers there, I'm not going to read them out. I guess the point here is, though, that people, again, are trying to be responsible. They're trying to edge out their networks. They're trying to get fiber deeper in the networks, ultimately achieve a fiber to the home deployment, and I'll talk about why that's important for many of the reasons. I think give some case studies, examples of why that's important along the lines of what Jeff just mentioned before. But the point here is too that we do see improvement. It's interesting to see that for $10 million or less, 35% of these companies serving some of the most challenging areas in the country think they could get fiber deep enough into their networks to deliver at least 25 meg symmetrical to all of their customers. Next slide, please. The payback to local communities, we think, is clear. We've looked at this and said, if we're going to make the case that fiber to the home is necessary in rural communities, we've really got to help explain it to how it affects the state, regional, and national economies as a whole. See that there's a payback to the large community that's not just accruing to the benefit solely of the local community in which it's deployed. So we saw the Hudson Institute do a study in 2011. I think it was a really interesting study in terms of the findings. That rural telecom investments and operations contributed almost $14.5 billion to the U.S. economy in 2009. And the fact is, $9.5 billion of that was estimated to accrue to the benefit of urban areas. And that comes both in the form of increased economic activity with those areas, the ability to interface more on business-to-business transactions. It comes also just in the supplies that are used to deploy rural telecom networks, fiber networks, bringing in contractors. You don't have contractors sitting on the call out in some of these rural areas. They're coming in from more urban areas. Equipment manufacturers, vendors, all coming in largely from urban areas where these folks are based. So a lot of that money, a lot of the economic benefit from rural telecom deployment, rural fiber deployment, rolls back to and accrues to the benefit of urban businesses, urban residents as well. We asked our membership in our 2011 or 2012 broadband survey, what were some of the primary barriers to fiber deployment? The two primary barriers cited, 92% cited cost, and just over 2/3 cited regulatory uncertainty. Those were the top two barriers in our survey. Interestingly, though, prior to some FCC reforms that were recently put into place in the last year, 18 months or so, roughly 2/3 of our membership anticipated offering fiber to the home to at least half of their customers by 2014. So we were looking at a potentially significant push between, say, 2012 and 2014 to put fiber to the home out to at least 50%, if not more, of these telcos' customer bases. Unfortunately, given some of the regulatory uncertainty that we've seen in the last few years, that looks to have stalled to some degree, and it's a challenge we're trying to work through now with policymakers. An Iowa study that was released in August of 2012 found that 80% of telcos in that state were delaying or canceling fiber deployment plans in the face of regulatory uncertainty, and in particular, the threat of further changes, atop changes that were enacted in late 2011. Similarly, in Wisconsin, an October 2012 study found that about half I think just 50% of the companies in Wisconsin had decided to delay or cancel their fiber deployments for similar reasons. We've got some challenges there to work through. The regulatory uncertainty is certainly an issue that affects and feeds into access to capital. A lender is obviously going to be looking more carefully at what the payback can be in light of some of the changes and challenges these small telcos face. But we do think that progress can be sustained. We are hopeful that by continuing to work with policymakers, we'll see the regulatory landscape settle there. And finally, just to sort of in closing, I wanted to cite a few case studies that I think are terrific examples of what can be done through fiber to the home deployments. And as Heather had mentioned when she started this call, how they generate real economic drivers for their communities. So the next slide, please. First example I wanted to talk about is a company called Dickey Rural Network, serves Dickey County and surrounding areas in the southeastern corner of North Dakota. This company has a density of 1.7 households per square mile. You see the numbers there. They serve 5,600 square miles, so they serve roughly the state, an area the size of the state of Connecticut, but only 9,700 households located within those areas. they've got a broadband adoption rate of almost 80%. This is really important. You know, we're not just putting these networks out here for the sake of putting them out there. Especially in this fiber to the home case, it really drives and stimulates broadband adoption. Consumers can see what they can do with it. They learn more about it through some programs we'll talk about later on the slide. Dickey Rural is 100% fiber to the home, and in fact, with a neighboring rural telco, it's another member of NTCA, Dakota Central, they represent the largest geographic fiber to the home footprint in North America, about 10,000 square miles. Dickey Rural is doing terrific things with its fiber to the home network. They've connected dozens of sites with electric co-ops, the electric companies up in this area, via Ethernet facilities for smart grid applications. They're actually enabling smart water monitoring and booster stations through Ethernet connections as well across this fiber network. They connect most of the federal, state, and educational institutions in that 5,600 square mile serving area through their network as well. And then one last interesting point I'll make about Dickey Rural, they've done a lot to work on adoption, to sell the value, show the value of a fiber to the home network in a way that then sells the value for the consumer. The Ellendale School District, Jeff Fosknott, it was the superintendent there. I actually had the chance to meet him when he came to Washington, D.C. He was named Superintendent of the Year in North Dakota a few years ago. He's struck up a great partnership with Dickey Rural to educate residents, make space available in the school for residents to come in and get educated on the benefits of fiber to the home services through Dickey Rural. And you know, the preceding speakers mentioned distance learning. Ellendale, I was talking to the superintendent there. It's interesting. He offers foreign language programs and Gothic literature was one case he cited to his students in Ellendale, North Dakota, through distance learning programs that are enabled through the fiber to the home or fiber to the school networks there. Those are opportunities he would have never had without those networks being out there. So I think it's a great case study. Next slide, please. Nextech in northwestern Kansas, similar story, over 80% broadband adoption rate with 6,000 plus fiber miles. You look at the anchor institutions they connect through this fiber network, it's quite astounding for the area they serve. I'll just make one note here because I want to get through my presentation quickly, but the free broadband and public Wi-Fi at all 38 libraries that they connect. Again, I think this demonstrates the market pull, the importance of community accountability that these small providers show, that they're willing to connect and enable free broadband and public Wi-Fi through these library systems. So I'll go to the next slide, but I just think that highlights how these fiber to the home networks accrue to the benefit of the broader communities, even as these companies are obviously trying to sell them to residents and households. I just want to mention finally this NTCA Smart Rural Communities Initiative. The mission of this initiative is to demonstrate these rural networks are being put to good use and provide models and best practices that different communities and telcos can share with one another along the lines of the last two slides. We kicked off this initiative in early 2012 with a white paper and a series of summits that involved federal policymakers, educators, healthcare providers, telcos, obviously. We're looking to expand this initiative in 2013 through looking at pilot community programs. And at the end of the day, we want to show that it's important to have these fiber connections, not just to the community anchor institutions, certainly very important, but to all of the businesses and all of the residences in these areas in order to foster innovation. I mean, you look at the press stories about what Google has done in Kansas City, which is just terrific in terms of fostering innovation and the culture of innovation that's growing up around that. There was just a story in the Washington Post about this recently. We think that you can see that in any number of communities if you deliver fiber and the capabilities, the promise that fiber offers to all of the businesses and all of the residents in these areas. So with that, I'll step out of the way and turn it over to Blair for his portion of the presentation. Thanks very much.
Great. Heather, would you like me just to begin?
Yep, just jump in.
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm the Executive Director of Gig.U, which, as you may know, is a consortium of about 36 universities, research universities and their communities who joined together about a year and a half ago to try to accelerate the deployment of next-generation networks in the United States. When we launched the program, Craig Moffett, who is the very eminent cable analyst for Sanford Bernstein, said you can't really build out these networks because the math doesn't work. And I think he was right in the following sense, that the current math doesn't work. But I think it's important for everyone to recognize that every major economic development, every major period of progress is really driven by a group or an individual who looks at the current math and figures out a way to change that math. If you go back in human history, you know, we did agriculture for 45,000 years before we really started to utilize animals, and that changed the math for how we did agriculture. If you look 250 years ago, you see that England took the lead as an industrial power in the world by changing the math about how we produce goods. In our own time, we are going through a revolution in which we are exchanging out as the primary creator of value the manipulation of atoms or manufacturing with goods and services that are being delivered by bits, chips, and bandwidth. We are adding an element of information as the key input into everything. And that changes the math for many things. The earlier people were talking about healthcare, talking about education, talking about the way we do business. It's all being changed. The ability to do a course with millions of people listening in with no incremental cost because of cheap distribution. It's all being done because the math is changing. So the question is, can we change the math for the deployment of these next generation networks? Next slide, please. Well, some think that that the math really can't really be changed, and therefore it's for the federal government to fundamentally effectively take over the existing networks to lower the price for them. There was an editorial in the New York Times to this extent. But ironically, at the same time that Professor Crawford was writing that, next slide please, what you see is that there are a number of cities who either have already or are trying to figure out how to change the math of next generation deployment. Some of these are gig.u communities, some of these involve utilities such as Chattanooga. But what's interesting is when we think about the math, it's always the same fundamental framework. The details are different, and what I want to basically run through in the next couple minutes is what the two critical formulas are, the two equations, and that's on, we start on 34, but now let's quickly go to 35. The first equation to think about is who benefits from a network upgrade. And it's always basically two categories. One is the investor in the network, and the second is everybody else. And so you look at these total benefits and you see that there are lots of people who are the beneficiaries of an upgrade, but there's a little bit of asymmetry because only one entity is really investing in it. So the question is that we started to look at is if you take this other group on slide 36 now, that effectively is everyone other than the private investor, are there things that can be done that can change the math for that investor and to induce a new level of investment? But to understand how to do that, we have to understand the math of the private sector investors' way of looking at the world. So now we go to slide 37. And in that equation, what we see today is that for the investor, the costs are going to be greater than the benefits, or broken down a little bit. Either the new or incremental capital expenditures plus operating expenditures are greater than the risk-adjusted revenues plus the system benefits, the benefits of investing in one place that inure to other places in the network, plus the threat of competitive losses. And so if we want to change that, going to slide 38, we have to have some combination of the first three factors going down and the second three factors going up. And I might note that if you think about it this way, slide 39, and I've worked in this space for 20 years, first as Chief of Staff at the Federal Communications Commission, and then as a Wall Street analyst, and then doing the National Broadband Plan. Pretty much every major investment we've had, either in a new network or an upgraded network, has occurred when government policy has acted to change the math of that equation. Now to slide 40. And so we start from thinking about all of the communities listed on that earlier slide effectively began to think about what assets do they have that affect that math, and how can existing assets, not new money, not new subsidies, but existing assets, be more effectively managed to create a favorable environment for investing in a project. Next slide. What you see here on slide 41 is a summary of some of the key elements of that. And at the conference, we'll be going into much greater detail. How did Kansas City do it with Google? What is the nature of that 20-some page document that does all of these things? How did the city of Seattle work with, run an RFP process resulting in an agreement with a company called Gigabit Squared? What did they offer? What did Gigabit Squared offer? Tomorrow we will have six communities in North Carolina that surround 4 major universities: UNC, Chapel Hill, Duke, NC State, and Wake Forest. They will be issuing an RFP that learned from Kansas City, that learned from Seattle, that learned from the city of Chicago. But the details are different because the communities have different assets, but the fundamental framework is the same. Going to the next slide, on 42, and one of the important things to understand that's going to be true, I think, at least for the next few years, is that these are market-leading networks. They are not market-following networks. What I mean by that is, if the demand is already there, then you build, it's not you build it and they will come, but rather they're already there, so you build the network to them. In the early days of the internet, it was pretty easy to see where these small incremental changes would lead to the new demand. But with gigabit connectivity, with fiber, you do develop capabilities greater than what the existing network, than what the existing demand would be. But as Henry Ford famously said, if I listened to my customers, they would have asked for faster horses. What you see is when you start to develop the products, it's not quite build it and they will come, but as the chairman of the FCC said, if you build it, they will innovate. And I think in those innovations, you start to see the consumers come. But in this early stage, the key, and Google will tell you this, as will the Gigabit Squared folks, as to any of the folks who, 60-some folks who answered the Gig.U RFI, in the short term, it's about creating technological infrastructure that builds human capital, and therefore the economics are not about finding the uses for which consumers today pay a premium, but rather how to deploy networks more cheaply so that you can get much, much faster speeds at today's prices. In other words, it's not, if today's market is a Camry at the price of a Camry, it's not how do you build a BMW and charge a BMW price. It's rather how do you build a Maserati and offer at the price of the Camry. That's what Google has effectively done in Kansas City, and that's what we think the math, if it's properly understood, can lead to. And so in conclusion, on slide 43, I just want to say that, and we'll again be talking a lot more about this at the conference, is that the barrier to gigabit connectivity, the barrier to world leadership, the barrier to a new generation of applications that follow this fantastic macroeconomic trend around the world of moving to the value in the economy being created over broadband. It's not technology or really even economics. It's the barriers organization, specifically organizing demand and the better use of underutilized assets. And like I said, we'll be going into great detail about this at the conference. Heather, back to you.
Yes, and let's move forward and hear from the folks from Kansas City.
Sure, we can pick it up. I'm Aaron Deacon. I'm the Managing Director for KC Digital Drive, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. We know that we're running short on time, and we want to give you a teaser of some of the things that we've learned here, and we hope that you come visit us in May. I'm going to kick it off first to Pam Curtis with Mayor Reardon's office in Kansas City, Kansas, and Rick Usher in Kansas City, Missouri City Manager's office to talk a little bit about how we got the infrastructure here. You can go next slide. And then I will pick it up with a little bit about what we've done since they came.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Pam Curtis. I work for Mayor Joe Reardon, who is the Mayor CEO of the Unified Government of Kansas City, Kansas, Wyandotte County. Our municipal government's a little bit unique in that we are both a city and county government combined. So for us, the process that we had was very much an internal process. We had a team of people, our professional staff in the unified government, along with our Board of Public Utilities, which is the municipal utility owned by the municipal government, put together an application for the Google Fiber project. And clearly behind that was our municipal utility had over the past few years looked at laying fiber, and in fact, they do have a lot of fiber infrastructure already, but looked at actually doing a fiber to the home project. The cost, of course, was always a big consideration there. So our, our decision to go after the Google Fiber project was very much rooted in the idea that local governments, they dwell in the area of infrastructure. And instinctively, we knew that fiber to the home infrastructure is something that we needed to seriously consider and bring to our city, if at all possible. So that was clearly behind our effort to apply for Google Fiber. It was very much an internal process until the announcement was made that Kansas City, Kansas was selected as the first Google Fiber city. Sure. Yeah, I'm sorry. Rick Usher wants to jump in here. So
okay.
We'll probably go back and forth.
Right. While we're talking about the response, on the Kansas City, Missouri side, what you're seeing is a photograph of Office Port. It's a co-working space, entrepreneurial center, and they had actually started working on the response there just as a civic project about a week before our office got involved in that. So on the Missouri side, it was an entrepreneur-led effort. And next slide. Councilwoman Cindy Circo, Kamiko Gilmore in the city manager's office, and I facilitated that response. And these are some emails that I received from Google after we hit send on the response. And we had a big party at a local brewery, and then we waited. So what we saw in that response was, again, all the things Pam has pointed out, our Public Works Department had about 2 years prior to this put out an RFP to different internet service providers and fiber companies, asking them to join us in building out our traffic signal conduit network and other fiber projects in an effort to share right-of-way, share conduit, waive fees, and basically dig up streets one time and build some decent fiber infrastructure. We had no responses to that RFP. So it's a unique situation, I think, for a city, both of our cities to be in, to be able to respond to Google saying, how do you want to do this? And so it puts us in a fun spot, and we'll tell you more about that when we come down, or when you come here. But then Pam, you kick us off on the next slide.
So once both Kansas cities were announced as having the Google Fiber project in the Kansas City metro, or in both cities, Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri, we're part of a metro area. Basically, the only thing that separates us is a line, or is a road called State Line and the river. So both of our mayors came together, Mayor Reardon and Mayor James, realizing the potential that this project brought to our cities, and decided that we needed to work together to really maximize this opportunity and to really make sure that Kansas City region was the beneficiary. So the two mayors, they named a Mayor's Bi-State Innovations Team, MBIT for short, who met for about a year, maybe a little bit longer, developed a playbook, which was a playbook for the community to take and execute those plays so that we can maximize Google Fiber. So that's definitely the approach that we took as far as a regional cooperation. And just unbelievable the amount of energy that went into bringing all the stakeholders together to really focus on what we needed to do to take total advantage of this project.
So next slide. This is kind of the reaction, right? When the award is made and there's this big announcement, and you know, while the governments and in some cases there were some community activists who had been pretty involved in this, I'd say by and large people said, "Wow, what does this mean? What do we do now?" Next slide. And the reaction was a number of organic initiatives. Even before the mayor's task force was appointed, you know, there's a certain pace that mayor's task force move at, and there's another pace that the community sometimes moves at. So there were a number of initiatives that kind of sprung up to sort of answer this question, what do we do? And the community energy that was generated has been a huge benefit and was something that was really felt in the community well before Google even began deployment, because it took them an awfully long time. Next slide.
And I would add to that you know, such community-wide enthusiasm. We're named the Google City, and then the next day it's like, okay, great, what does that mean? So the mayor developed a slideshow that he went out and just a very grassroots effort to talk to people about why speed matters, and was able to just step back and kind of walk through technology and the changes that we've even seen in the last 10, 15, 20 years. And people started getting it. It's like, do you remember, you know, dial-up? Do you remember the old cable boxes that we used to have? And as you walk through that, people all of a sudden realize you now have a device that you carry in your pocket that you can watch live streaming, and it starts making sense why speed matters. So there was very much an effort to have that dialogue at a very grassroots level, which once Google announced their plan as far as signing up neighborhoods to deploy, totally made sense that we had to lay that groundwork so that people would engage.
Next slide. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. This was sort of the outcome, right? So Google, I think that a lot of people on the call probably know about Google's market-driven deployment plan, and so we had this long cycle where Google wasn't really saying anything, a year and a half. We did a lot of the planning where that playbook that you saw came out, and we used that time for community preparation. And part of that was a very neighborhood door-to-door level. And one of the things that we found, and this was really a key element that runs throughout the whole playbook that I'm working from, is that when you have these conversations, we're not talking about most of what we've been talking about today in terms of how many megabits up, in terms of symmetrical speeds, even some of the telemedicine stuff and some of the use cases in 3D. You might get into that, but really there's a line early in the playbook about this project being 90% sociology and 10% technology, and that's really been true. The next slide. If you look at the strategic objectives of KC Digital Drive, and this is the initiative that has been started to really implement the playbook. And so we had 23 plays organized under these 4 basic strategies, to ensure universal access, to drive innovation through demonstration, to expand economic opportunities, and to establish global leadership. These aren't necessarily technology goals. And to give one example, and to go back to Jeff's comments about healthcare and telemedicine, and we had our healthcare team, which is an amazing collaboration of different hospitals, nonprofits, and community organizations, kind of interested in what this next generation network means for healthcare. One of the things that we'll work on is moving from a fee-for-service model to a quality of care model for healthcare payment, because it's hard to go in and say, well, we just want to do a telehealth pilot, because there are so many structural issues that make that difficult to do. And so the way that we are tackling problems becomes much more socially oriented. there's been some talk about the spirit of sort of entrepreneurship and innovation here that is not just around technology, although that's certainly part of it. Next slide. But there is, all of these other community efforts. Again, some organic, some that are driven by, the kind of main institutions in town. But there is really an amazing amount of collaboration on a social side, and I think that's where we see a lot of the opportunity for the future, and what we hope to talk to you about when you're in town. Next slide. It is only in the past few months that Google has actually begun laying fiber. And so it's amazing to see how much has happened really without anything even being laid in the ground. And that's not quite true, but the first home I think was turned on late October. So we've actually seen maybe 2 months worth of impact of people having fiber in the homes, and already we've seen a tremendous impact on the economy and on the cultural scene here. Yeah.
And one of the roles that I play on the Missouri side, this is Rick Usher again, is facilitating our technical committee with Google Fiber and their contractors and engineers. And when you look back to the FCC commissioner's visit to Kansas City last year, he said the most important thing was how these two communities are dealing with right-of-way management. And we really look at our right-of-way assets as a conduit to economic development, economic activity, and not necessarily a revenue stream. If we charge incredible fees to use that right-of-way, we're not making it attractive to do that. We're seeing and looking at the economic activity that will be a result of this incredible piece of infrastructure being constructed in our city. And if you're watching any of the media, you're seeing that people are moving to Kansas City, Missouri, Kansas City, Kansas to take advantage of this. Companies are moving, and most importantly, young people in Kansas City are staying in the community and seeing opportunity because of this.
One of the great things about the Google Fiber project that we were able to negotiate with Google is the free services that will be provided to schools and government buildings in both cities. And that definitely was a community benefit that provided the justification for any sort of access that Google was given through the development agreement. So that was important for us to know that, as it is in any of our development deals, that there was a greater community benefit coming back to us.
Thank you, Heather, for having us on here, and we'll turn it over to Steve.
Great, thanks very much. I'm Steve Traylor. I'm the Executive Director of NATOA. I'm going to go through my presentation fairly quickly, so we still might have some time for some questions here, but really I'm here to talk about managing the political process, and really what is that all about? It means building a coalition. You definitely heard from the folks from Kansas City here that really a coalition of different groups, political, business, and civic, is really the keystone to getting these projects in your community. One of the things that we've seen nationwide, just with regular old broadband that a lot of us have, is the problem with the adoption. And one of the problems with adoption nowadays is that folks just don't realize what the relevance is to their daily lives. To bring a high-speed network into your community, you're going to have to educate everyone, all the stakeholders, as to the relevance of why these high-speed systems are necessary. And really, the stakeholders are only limited by your imagination. Bring in as many people, as many groups as possible into your coalition to try to get a new project or get existing projects to upgrade. And if you can go to the next slide, I will go ahead and talk about the, and one more, and we'll talk about the political leaders. Really, one of the main things you can do in your community is, and if you'll go to 58, please, is try to get a buy-in by your political leaders. It really helps to know who your champion is going to be. As you just heard from the folks at Google, the mayors of Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas, we're really behind this effort. Recently, the FCC chairman spoke to the U.S. Conference of Mayors and really challenged the mayors to see that each state had at least one community with a 1 gigabit network. And why did he go to the mayors? Because the mayors are political leaders that you can point to, that folks know, that folks listen to. So really, try to figure out who your champion is and get them on your side. When you're doing the political movements, make it bipartisan by all means. And also, talk to your state, municipal, and county associations. They have a lot of outreach abilities and a lot of communication services they can offer to you to really go ahead and build up your project and help you work it through the political process. They can also help you possibly deflecting type of negative political pressure that might be coming in on your particular project. If you go to the next one, what we're going to talk about are business leaders. Get your business leaders involved. I can't emphasize that enough. And even though it sounds like common sense, because these networks can really add to the economic development of your community, make sure they're on board. One way to do it is contact and work with your Chamber of Commerce and any economic development agencies in your community or in your region. Get them on board. Let them know what these networks can do, the type of jobs they can create, and the benefits that they're going to bring to your community. And get Main Street USA on your side. The benefits that these types of services can provide to existing businesses and to new businesses is unbelievable. And that means also talk about the users of your network as well as those that can see some type of business opportunity involved, the innovators. Get them involved. And go to the next slide, and we come to basically the third leg of this stool is civic leaders. The folks that run your schools and libraries and your community service organizations. Get them involved in this. Let them know what high-speed services can provide to their communities. You've already heard about distance learning and telemedicine. Those things are fantastic, but you've got to educate the folks that will be out there pushing it. You know, get your PTAs involved. Let them know what these services can do, how great it would be to offer distance learning to their kids so they don't have to be bused across school, or they won't be limited by where they live in a particular area of the state. Also get your local media involved. Have interviews with the editorial boards of your local newspapers. Get them involved. Keep them aware of what the project is and how the project is moving along. They can help sell this project just as well as you can, so make sure that you communicate a lot with them. We'll go to the next slide here. And really, it's managing the message. Make sure you get your message of the importance of these networks out there. When you quit talking, you create a vacuum that the opposition can move into and start spreading negative stories about what the system might do or may not do. Keep your message simple. It's the benefits that these projects are going to do. And as the folks from Google again mentioned, grassroots campaign. Get everyone involved in your community about how important these things are, how important these projects are. One of the things I've said repeatedly as an executive director at NATOA is I want to hear cities say, why does Kansas City have that network? Why does Chattanooga have a network like that? Lafayette, why do they have a gigabit network? Why don't we have it? Make it competitive. Make it to where your community is demanding these type of projects. Make it a competition. You know, again, you see how it is in your states, how sports competitions really get the folks revved up. Get the same type of activity there as far as these gigabit projects are. Really make it competitive. They have it, why can't we? So again, you know, I'm just kind of wrapping this up quickly so I can hand it back to Heather for some questions. But really the thing is coalition, coalition, coalition. And again, it's only limited by your imagination. Heather?
Thank you, Steve. So I think you've heard several. First of all, thank you all the speakers, and you all were terrific. I think we really conveyed to the audience the amount of resources that are out there from all of your entities to help as they try to work through how to become, you know, go to gigabit deployed. And to that effort, I did want to tell you that we will, and you heard a couple of the speakers mention this, we will be holding a community, what we call the Community Toolkit conference in Kansas City, May 29th and 30th. We have the pages are up on the web. You can see the website. And you can go online now and see the extensive agenda that we have put together for you. We're really counting on having very good breakout sessions where you can ask lots of detailed questions and meet with the people that have done this. We plan to draw our speakers not only from the organizations that you've heard from today, but from the service providers and operators that have already, and the communities that have already done this, so that you'll really get some good peer-to-peer learning, and you'll not be hearing from people that are just talking about it in theory, but people that have really moved their communities forward with that. And with that, I'd like to open it up for any kind of questions. I have a couple here. I saw there were a lot of general questions. I think they were answered. This is for, I would say, KC Digital Divide, or anyone else on the call who might know it. Is Google's objective was to learn new ways people could come up with the use of the fiber, and can you give us some examples of those?
I'd say yes, of course. That was one of the 3 or 4 bulleted challenges in the RFI, was to see what the gigabit web would bring. I think one great example is SiteDeck.KC. It's a virtual conferencing platform. Really got to see it to believe it, but it is what I would say is a true gigabit app, and it basically allows collaboration and participation in a presentation from 4 remote locations anywhere in the world. But the best thing, of course, is to see it at sitedeckKC.com.
Yeah, I think that as Rick said, that's part of their goal. I think really what their goal is to prove out the business model, to prove that you can deliver a gigabit network, fiber to the home network, and make money on it. Obviously, the application is part of that, and I think there are, and I think we covered this a little bit earlier. In terms of just video quality and how much bandwidth that takes as it increases. In terms of real-time data manipulations, if you think about sort of the next generation of mapping programs, you think about cloud services and software-defined networking. There are a lot of potential applications, but in terms of the thing that everyone's looking for, the killer app, the new Facebook or something like that actually requires a gig. There's just not a market there yet for that to come about.
I think another indicator that not only is Google looking at that, but the tech community is looking at it is Code for America has chosen Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri as their cities for this year. Our joint application to them highlighted Google Fiber, so I'm sure they're looking at what they can do with the network. And announcing tomorrow the digital sandbox at UMKC is a proof of concept laboratory for gigabit apps. We've had another incubator across the street,
SparkLab KC.
SparkLab KC that just jumped in. So we're seeing tech companies coming, tech accelerators coming, and we're also seeing investors coming. At SparkLab KC, one of their incentives is that companies will receive up to $18,000 to prove their business concept in a 90-day program.
And we have next week, we've got a partnership with US Ignite. We'll be announcing called Hacking the Gigabit City, sort of building on some of the other stuff that we've done. In the model of things like Hackanooga and the development specific events elsewhere, but the interesting thing that we'll have here over the course of the coming year is a lot of homes that actually have a gig in the home. And so we've got some things in the works to really bring that developer market an opportunity, not necessarily to have a business plan this year, because 20,000 households isn't enough to start a new business, but it is sure enough to test new products. And so we hope to really see that continue to happen.
Blair, I have a question from somebody who wants to know where to find your book.
If you just Google The Politics of Abundance, Reed Hunt and Blair Levin, it'll lead you to an Amazon site, a Barnes & Noble site. It's an ebook only, but it's on all the major ebook formats. And Jeff, thank you very much for your kind words about it. It is in the spirit of all of these things, which is trying to take America's great strength, which is technology and innovation, and try to apply that to our politics to make our politics better.
I have a question, maybe somebody technical on the panel knows this. It has to do with Hurricane Sandy, which showed that redundant connections are important and during catastrophic failures. And does anyone on the call, I'm not sure we have that expertise, but we might know of any mixed medium or mesh deployments that would serve as models?
If I could just say a quick word about that, I think that's one of the interesting, the FCC has obviously been looking into that. They will have some field hearings on what happened in Superstorm Sandy. My favorite little kind of odd note, I watch too much late night television, as you're about to see, but it is absolutely true. Verizon stopped their Fios buildup. They were not building out to any further communities, but they have now changed their policy for one set of communities, those which were destroyed by Hurricane Sandy, because they basically have to rebuild their infrastructure anyway. So for those communities who thought they were going to get Fios but didn't, my recommendation, of course, is cause a major storm to come your way. But there probably, hopefully, our conference will have other ways by which you can get a network upgrade. But I do think, I would just note that I think that the issue which is teed up in a number of proceedings with the FCC is a very serious one and a very difficult one. On one hand, we certainly want the networks to withstand what is clearly going to be a difficult period of time with much more volatile storms. On the other hand, it is very possible that the FCC could adopt rules that require hardening in ways that make it, that are easy for an incumbent or easier for an incumbent to do, but make it more difficult for competitors to do. And there's an interesting question about whether it's better to have one hard network or 5 or 6 networks that, on the theory that one of them is going to go down or 2 of them will go down, but at least you'll have redundancy. So that's a question that has not yet been resolved, but probably will be in front of us for some time to come.
Do we have any other questions? Most of the ones I've seen are administrative, and they're having to do with where the slides and the webinar is being recorded. It will be distributed to all of the entities that were partners on this call, and they will have it on their websites. So you'll be able to see the slides again through that. With that, I really want to thank everyone for lasting. I think the information was very valuable. We hope that has generated a lot of additional questions for you, and that we will see you all in Kansas City to try to answer those questions in even more detail than we could on an hour and 20-minute call. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to any of the organizations that have participated today, and we will try to get you further explanations. And with that, I'm thanking you and letting you go for the evening.
Thank you very much.